I've got a question for you about landscape photography. What lens do you shoot with more than any other? Is it the ubiquitous 16 to 35 or the 17 to 40? Is it something a bit wider like this 10 to 18 from Canon, or maybe this 14mm prime from Samyang? If you said yes to any of those, then you're like most of us. It's logical to walk up to a scene, whether it's a desertscape, hills, forest, a river, and immediately look at it from the perspective of a wide view. After all, that's how we see. We see things wide. The trouble is, though, there are a few of them, actually, is that when you're shooting wide, number one, you're getting a huge amount of the landscape in your image. That means there are a lot of elements to manage. To the naked eye, a scene might look very, very pleasing. I mean, for a start, we're seeing it in 3 dimensions. Plus, we're also getting the benefit of the sound, the smells, the temperature on our skin, the breeze passing by, all that sort of stuff. And all of these things sort of augment our experience of the scene in front of us. But when we photograph it, of course, it's in 2 dimensions. There's no movement, there's no sound. Yes, we can simulate movement with a long exposure and that sort of stuff. But while our brain will filter out things that aren't of interest to us, when it's presented to us as a 2-dimensional image, we can't ignore those things. And when you're shooting wide, you have a lot of things in your image. And the trouble is, if you have, say, a nice collection of rocks over here, you have some moving water here, you've got a lovely tree hanging over there, you've got a waterfall back here, and up here you've got some lovely hills in the distance. The trouble is the brain doesn't know what to focus on. And the brain's number one job is survival. And that means burning the fewest amount of calories. In other words, avoiding thinking. When our brain is confronted with an image, its first job is to quickly determine what it is. Where's the focal point? What is the subject of this thing? Are there any patterns or leading lines? Is there anything that it can quickly latch onto? And when it's presented with too many things, it has to burn too many calories to move around and decide, what am I actually looking at here? And that's one of the problems with shooting wide. The other, of course, is that it pushes things further away. So while you might be looking at a scene and thinking, that waterfall there looks magnificent, and if I get these rocks in the foreground, it'll look great. But when you're shooting wide, that might get pushed quite a long way away, and then it no longer has the impact that it had when you saw it with your own eyes. But the real core issue is, when you approach a scene, your eyes immediately latch onto specific elements. I mean, for example, when I drove down what I call the hidden road the other day in a video that I put together, there was some beautiful scenery there, beautiful wide vistas. But if I'm honest, my eye was drawn to specific things. There was a little farm shed on the side of a hill. There was a stand of trees on a ridge. There was a dam down in the valley there with a pair of trees right in front of them. There were 3 folds in a hill behind that, which I was hoping would catch the light in an interesting way. They're the things that grab my attention. Now, if I tried to get them all into an image, it would immediately lose all impact. Because again, the brain would look at it and go, okay, so what am I looking at here? There's a shed there, there's a body of water there, there's some folds in the hill, there's some trees up there. It loses impact. Whereas if I grab a long lens, like this, my favorite lens, the Canon 100-400 USM II L lens, if I grab a long lens like this, I can pluck out things in the scene. I can zoom in on that shed that's up on the side of the hill, or that stand of trees on the ridge, or like I did with that video that I posted the other week, a little dam with a couple of trees in front of it, with the folds of the hills behind it. By using this, I can isolate the things that actually caught my eye in the first place and convey that to the person who ends up viewing the image, therefore having a lot more impact than if I'd tried to get everything in. And there are lots of other benefits too. When you shoot with a long lens, you're able to compress elements in the image. Unlike a wide lens, which pushes things further away, a longer lens will create the impression of compressing the foreground, the midground, and the background. So you can create a more impactful image. And because you can really minimize the depth of field that's in the image by shooting wide, say at f4, f5.6, that kind of thing, on a lens like this, well then you can blur out, say, the grass in the foreground, pluck out the trees in the midground, and then blur out the hills in the background. And that creates a much more pleasing effect, almost like a painting, rather than trying to just get everything in. Now, it doesn't always need to be really tight, and I'm a fan of giving elements in an image room to breathe. I don't advocate always getting in, super tight on everything. And so oftentimes a lens like this RF 24-105 are great for that, because 105mm, or even better, say something like a 70-210, allows you to, at least just isolate the things in the periphery which would detract from the image and just hone in a bit more on the elements of the image that were really appealing to you. This particular lens has another fantastic use which I've discovered. When I first bought it, I thought this would be the lens that would sit on my camera most of the time. But what I soon discovered was that every time I went out, I would put this thing on and I would favour the images that came out of this for all the reasons that I mentioned before. So only about a week ago, I decided to take this off my camera and put the 100-400 on there permanently. I still use this, but here's what I use it for. If I'm confronted with possible compositions that I'm not sure exactly what kind of image I'm after, I'll put this on and I'll walk around with it. And I'll walk around with it at using both ends of the focal range. I'll have a look at things at 24 and then I'll zoom out and I'll see how things look at 105. Now, while I mightn't shoot at either of those focal lengths, it gives me an idea of how this particular subject might look if I get in close and shoot wide, or if I stand back and tighten and compress the image up a bit and shoot long. There was a perfect example of this just a few nights ago where I went out with my son to this fantastic location full of massive boulders. And when you drive through there, the scenery is spectacular, but it's one of those weird, quirky places where it looks fantastic to the naked eye, but it's very hard to find an image. Because when you're looking at it, you got a much better sense of scale. You can see how massive the boulders are. But of course, like a lot of things, when you photograph them, they don't look so big anymore. You just don't get that sense of perspective because you're looking at a two-dimensional representation instead of the 3 dimensions that we look at with our eyes. So what I did was I walked around with that lens, looked at different things at 24 and at 105, and I managed to find something that I thought, yes, that's going to look good wide. I need to shoot this one wide. So what I did was I took this off and then I put on the beautiful Samyang 14mm prime. This is a gorgeous lens. It's sharp from end to end. It's beautifully made. The only downside is you can't put filters on it unless you get a very expensive filter holder, and then the filters are very expensive too because they have to be particularly large. And that's why I actually have decided to buy a 16-35 again. I had one. I found that I didn't use it very much, and so I got rid of it. But now that I have actually started doing a few images with this Samyang 14mm, I realise that I really need a wide lens where I can put a polarizer, a neutral density, and a graduated ND filter on it. So I've ordered one again. Yes, it's not as wide as this. It's 16 versus 14, but I can keep this for astrophotography. It's a 2.8, so it's good for astrophotography. And the 16-35 combined with the 100-400, I think are going to be absolutely perfect for shooting landscapes, and they should cover just about every eventuality. So combined with the 24-105 for scoping out and deciding, how to shoot, whether it's going to be long or wide, plus using it occasionally as a walk-around lens if I go to my dad's place and just want to bring one lens, then I think those three combined are going to be absolutely perfect. But I would urge you, if you've been shooting landscapes wide all the time, get yourself a longer lens if you don't already. Get yourself a 70-210 or 70-200 if you can, or a 70-300 or a 100-400 if you can stretch for that, because I guarantee it'll transform your photography. You will realize how much more impactful an image is when you isolate the elements that caught your eye in the first place and focus on those through blurring out foregrounds and backgrounds, compressing perspective, getting rid of all the periphery that detracts from the image, and just getting in more intimate with your subject. You're going to wind up with some fantastic images. And like me, you're probably going to want to shoot a long lens on landscapes a lot more often. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Thanks for hanging out with me again, and I'll see you in the next video.